Welcome all. Still got a few people joining, so we'll probably give it another minute. People are still joining, so I'll give another 30 seconds. All right, I think we've got a quorum now. The new people joining it is starting to slow down. Great interest in today's session. So, yeah, appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy Monday afternoon to hear more about the Distribution System Plan Opportunities Report. For those that don't know me, my name's Daniel Morgan. I'm a director at KPMG, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. And I've spent the last 12 months working with our other panelists on this project. And alongside me today in the discussion is Alida Jansen van Vuren, head of DSO and project lead from Ausgrid, Mel Dwayhe, head of strategy and project lead from Endeavour Energy, Mark Thibault, head of strategy and project lead from Essential Energy, and Franklin Liu, director at Endgame Analytics. For those that can't join the session today, we will be recording it and posting it afterwards. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the different traditional owner groups across New South Wales. So today we'll be talking about the poles, wires, substations that make up the New South Wales distribution network. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise them as the traditional custodians of the land on which those assets reside. So on Monday last week, Ausgrid, Endeavour and Essential released an Australian first New South Wales Distribution System Plan Opportunities Report. The report identifies opportunities to do more with existing distribution network assets. So these are assets that have already been paid for, and how can we get more out of it to support the energy transition? The purpose of today's conversation is to hear a bit more about the underlying analysis that went into identification of those opportunities, and to give you all a chance to ask your questions about the report. The conversation will be split into two halves. So the first half will focus on the approach and modelling methodology, and the second half will then look at the insights and reform areas that we've identified to unlock the value identified through that modelling. We'll have a moderated Q&A at the end of each half. So we encourage everyone to post your questions in the Q&A function. We've already received a lot of questions through the registration process, so I appreciate Everyone's submitting those. We'll try and get through as many as we can today. We probably won't be able to get through all of them, but we will publish a Q&A document on the microsite afterwards that looks to address all questions, including those we don't get to today. There's also a link on the microsite where you can email through more specific questions, and all three businesses will receive those. All right, so we're going to kick off with project intent and context, and I will hand over to Mel and Mark.
Thanks, Dan, and thank you everybody who's joined. It's certainly a fantastic number of people that are joining online and interest in this report. I'll start with the why. I guess, what are the objectives and what was the purpose of this? And this was a piece of work where probably close to 18 months ago that we started the conversation. So Ausgrid, Endeavour and Essential started the conversation around, well, what can we do for the energy transition? We know there's a lot of capacity that sits in our network. We know that customers are doing a lot with their customer energy resources. And we know that the planning to date has probably not really considered distribution in its entirety. So there was an opportunity that the three networks thought, well, let's lean into this and let's step forward and use the information and the data that we do have as three networks and pull that together to support and do our bit for meeting those net zero targets. Networks have worked together in bits and pieces over the years, but this is probably a first in terms of really working together and drawing deep from within our businesses. So really looking at, not only the data, but also the planning, the regulatory, all of those components that really do make up a whole of system approach to how we can transition across the network. We know we've done a lot of work in terms of, trying to look at two-way flows, trying to look at those high loads, those unknowns that are coming into our network as, everybody's trying to transition. And we know we need to keep our system reliable and secure. And while we were all doing our bits around these challenges, this was the opportunity to come together and, okay, let's see how we can baseline those sorts of activities across all of New South Wales. So we looked at this in terms of sub-transmission, medium, low voltage network and the value that we could measure across, all aspects of our networks, and we'll get into that detail further on. If we try and summarise, I guess, the three reasons for why we thought there was value in the networks coming together, it can probably be summarised as, doing our bit as well for reducing the pressure on household energy costs. There's no doubt that energy costs are rising, and if we use the infrastructure and the assets that are already in place, can that help support or reduce the burden of that cost on households? And as we go through the findings today, you'll see that there is value there that can be extracted because there is infrastructure that's already in place. So that's number one. Number two is that we know the transition is a big ask, and that it has its time challenges and it has its cost challenges. And with the distribution networks, there is the opportunity for us to de-risk those challenges that are there. So certainly not saying we're not going with what we've already got planned, but there is a role that we can play to step in there and help to just take that burden off the time and the cost pressure that's there for our state. And finally, it's the social licence and equity issues that the distribution system plan can help support. So really looking there at, lifting our role in terms of the social licence. So it's not all in those, rural, regional areas, but what can some of the regions closer to the city do to help support that transition, as well as making sure that everybody has access to clean, green energy. So this isn't just for those that, own those assets, they own their own solar system or they own their own batteries, but those that don't have access to that, well, how can the networks help support that access as well? So they were sort of the three objectives. I won't go into all the details of the purpose, only to say that this is really about whole of system planning. It's not just drawing a spotlight on distribution and saying this is what you need to do. What this DSP is really saying is let's make sure that the planning is a whole of system planning and that it adequately considers, from a bottom-up perspective, the role of the distribution networks, as well as where, you know, that capacity can be identified and then obviously coordinated and considered in the way that, you know, all of the system planning is developed. So I guess that's just a really important call out as we sort of head through today's session, and you'll hear a lot more detail across, you know, some of those areas that I've discussed. So with that, I will hand to Mark, who will go into more detail around the considerations for this piece of work.
Thank you, Melissa, for sharing the why of that piece of work. And I think I'd like to explain a bit the context. You know, there are a number of reports already out there. There are a number of reviews that have happened recently. So we need to explain a bit how this report is different, the role it meant to play, the gap we're seeing, and also acknowledge the current debate that is happening at the moment in terms of strategic network planning. And that really starts with a question. I really would like to be clear on the problem we are trying to solve. And the key question is how to better integrate distribution network solution into that system planning. That's the big question. And we know that historically, or in the past, the focus has been more on transmission, focus been on the renewable energy zone, on large utility scale projects, and that distribution opportunities has been missing or overlooked. And that's what we mean when we talked about the missing middle in the energy transition. It's that support that the distribution can bring. So we see already quite some momentum and support behind that idea, behind that understanding that in order to use the latent subtransmission capacity and better orchestrate CER, we must first give visibility of these opportunities into the system planning. And when I talk about momentum, I'm thinking about, for example, the latest AEMC rule change on integrated system plan that the Energy Consumer Australia has been requesting. Well, also to acknowledge the IMO integrated system plan, of course. It's evolving and it's bringing to life the demand side factors that are part of the distribution network. And also want to mention the very latest recommendation from the New South Wales Transmission Review that is very supportive about the role of distribution can play and is advocating about an independent New South Wales system planner. So all these parties agree that more visibility is needed about those distribution level opportunities. And this piece of work is really about how to do that. One of the challenges in the doing, and we hope to contribute not only with the insight, but also about the methodology and the approach that we've been using, and that can contribute into that debate in terms of strategic network planning. But also, why a new report? We know that, after all, DNSP are already producing every year and publishing the DAPR, the Distribution Annual Planning Review. But there is two key differences here. One, here we support a strategic plan. The DAPR is focused on the next 5-10 years and is focused on proven existing needs. Here we look 25 years into the future, 25-year horizon, when we need to anticipate the supply and demand over that long term. There is also a shift in perspective that Melissa alluded to. While the DAPR is looking at the national energy rule requirements and assessing the value of today, from a network perspective, here we take that wall of system value, thinking about the overall social benefits and network lowest cost for the system. So overall, it's about being more strategic and that wall of system value. I also want to draw the contrast with the IMO ISP. Of course, that's a very strategic document. And again, we try here to complement those existing reports and approach. Two key differences. One, this report intend to be more granular. We used a bottom-up view of supply and demand across, deeper into the network. And we think that is necessary to explain and truly present the value that distribution network can bring. And it's also about the breadth of scenario that we have been able to explore. While the IMO ISP is focused on achieving net zero targets, we could explore here delays on transmission builds, explore slower retirement for coal, or stronger demand coming from data center load and electrification. So the key point here is where we really try to build on existing reports, and it's really meant to inform that debate on overall system planning by presenting how this can be achieved. And because the method matters, I'd like to invite Franklin from Endgame's Economic to walk us through the methodology, the process that we have pioneered here to really unveil those distribution opportunities, because we really think there is a contribution that the three networks can make here.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm just waiting for the slide to turn on. So thank you. So yes, we Endgame Analytics undertook the modeling for the DSP project. And broadly speaking, our modeling consists of two components. The first component is a rather novel approach of applying an ISP-style techno-economic modeling onto the distribution network. So we undertook this distribution techno-economic modeling for every zone substations in New South Wales. And there's about 600 plus zone substations modeled. So what we're looking for there is the long-term, almost a system planning mix at the distribution level, at the distribution zone substation level, and how that changes in different opportunities we explored. I'll go a little bit further into that in a bit later. The other type of modeling we did is the more traditional wholesale market modeling. The reason we did that is because we, as part of this project, need to look at the benefits of utilizing sub-transmission hosting capacity within the distribution network to connect wind and solar to facilitate the drive towards net zero. And and that's the reason why we used the standard market modeling approach, which is to look at the benefit of utilizing this type of capacity for the entire system. So that means the entire New South Wales, as well as through the interconnectors, the entire NEM. So across this modeling, we have looked at multiple opportunities, which is sort of things we turn, the type of actions we turn on. As well as different scenarios, which is the macro market background. And I'll give them I'll give an overview of these in the next two slides. So first of all, in terms of the opportunities, so relative to the status quo, which we assume we only, the status quo basically assume a rather optimistic still view about how the transition is going to unfold, so that we still keep the uptake of rooftop PV and household battery at AEMO's step change level. However, in the status quo, we assume there is a lower level of orchestration of household assets, including household batteries and PV. Household battery and electrical vehicles. And we assume that the only investment opportunity that's available for distribution network are just their traditional poles and wire investment. Now, looking into the opportunities, the first opportunity we looked at is just the distribution opportunity. So what if we allow distribution network to connect batteries deep into the distribution network, so somewhere at appropriate level within the zone substations. When the other opportunity we looked at is unlocking CER side of the opportunity. So we assume much more higher level of orchestration from household batteries. So more of household batteries participate in the VPP scheme. And we also assume EV chargers are more towards the middle of the day. So that will better utilize the middle of the day solar hosting capacity. And then in the last opportunity we modeled, we just put the DER and CER opportunities together, and then we look at the total benefit coming from this an opportunity unlocked, I would say, an opportunity unlocked scenario. Now let's look at the market modeling background we have run our model through. So there are three. Oh, sorry, slide change a little bit. Thank you. So there are three market scenarios we have modeled, capturing different level of demand and supply in the rest of the system. The first scenario is customer transformation, which we got DNSP's forecast for demand, and we also used the more or less similar input assumption on the supply side, like the ISP. However, we applied some realistic delays to transmission projects relative to the 2024 ISP optimal development pathway. And we assume that, as we see these days in the market, there's a little bit of constraint on how quickly wind can come into the system, especially before 2030s. So sort of in the customer transformation, we modeled a central scenario reflecting DNSP's demand forecast, as well as on the supply side, some realistic constraints that we're facing in this net zero transition. Now, there's two other scenarios. Falling short, which is essentially assuming that demand uptake is lower. So there's less electrification, there's less EV uptake, and there's less data center uptake. There's some further constraint on the supply side as well, in the falling short. And the last scenario is the optimistic case, which we just assume demand is the same as the customer transformation scenario based on the DNSP's forecast, but the supply side is completely unconstrained, so that they effectively mirror what was in the 2024 AEMO ISP. The next slide, please. So just a little bit overview of the demand we have modeled in this project. So this is New South Wales demand, and what we have broken out is the light blue is the traditional grid demand from the distribution network. It is forecast to grow in the coming years because of the overall renewable net zero transition, which means that there will be further electrification loads as well as additional EV uptake in later years. The top one is something probably that's worth drawing out. These are the data center loads that are forecast to come into New South Wales. Now, so this is a quite conservative estimate we worked together with the DNSPs. So in the long term, we're talking about roughly by 2040, an equivalent of 4 gigawatts of data center load coming into the system. And that is based on some very detailed assessment the DNSPs undertook to remove duplicate application in a pipeline, to apply probabilistic filters based on the chance of connecting, and to assume that any additional connection post 2030 is not any additional connection post 2030 are not accounted for here, and so any additional growth you see are just ramping up of the existing connection up to 2030. Even then, what we're seeing is out of 20 gigawatts of application pipeline, there's about 4 gigawatts that made it through, and by 2040 they'd be more or less fully utilized at an equivalent of 4 gigawatts of flat load. So that is a reasonably large chunk of demand that the system needs to cater for in a long term, and this is what our model will capture. The next slide, please. So I'll first talk about the distribution techno-economic model. Remember, for this modeling, we undertook essentially a 25-year plan for at half-hourly granularity for every zone substation in New South Wales. And there are about 600 plus zone substations. So in order to do this exercise, we need to first construct what the population in each zone substation looks like. And we've worked very extensively with the distribution network to obtain information regarding individual customer load profiles, to information about the CER uptake, as well as future forecast of demand and CER uptake. We then use the statistical approach to grow out the population behind each zone substation based on the sample load profile, as well as the demographics coming from the DNSP's forecast. So this is, as you can see here, this is essentially the fruit of this labor. So every DNSP is actually talking a pretty different story into the long term. So even though they're all in New South Wales, they actually cover different area of New South Wales. Ausgrid, for example, in the long term, while it still has increased PV penetration, the major feature of the Ausgrid network is the significant growth in the EV load. So that's light blue on the top. And all the EV charging in the middle of the day is more or less offset the solar generation in Ausgrid's network, assuming that EV more or less will charge in the way AEMO forecasts in the ISP. So in the long term, we actually see a stabilization of the middle of the day demand, which is the net demand is represented by this red line. So you can see in the long term, there's more or less on average stabilization of middle of the day demand in Ausgrid's network. Essentially is the other side of completely the opposite story, right? Generally less people in the country areas, so the load growth is much smaller, and there's not as many EVs coming into the Essentials network. But on the other hand, there's a lot of opportunities for rooftop PV and large rooftop PV to connect into Essentials network. And as a result, what we see is that in the middle of the day, essentially post 2030, Essential becomes on average a net exporter to the rest of the New South Wales system. And Endeavour somewhere sits in the middle. There is reasonable population growth in the network, not as much activity in terms of EV compared to Ausgrid, and somewhat more better rooftop to host customer PV. And as a result, Endeavour's network somewhere sits in the middle, but still the middle of the day load holds steady until well into the 2040s, where it starts to become gradually an exporter. So if we go to the next slide. So this is the crux of the finding of the distribution techno-economic modeling. So remember, we undertook the modeling. We run this model we run this mini system planning model for every zone substation. And the result you're seeing here is summing up all the zone substations into the New South Wales level. So the status quo is the black line. And as you can see, the only thing that DNSP could do is continue to build out the zone substations in order to meet increasing demand. The green line is what happens when we utilize all opportunities. And the major thing to sort of focus here is that there's a lot of benefit that could be brought about by bringing batteries into the right part of the distribution network. Battery is going to happen anyway in the long term, right? We all know that with the renewable transition, we will need to build more storage to sort of couple them with wind and solar. What this model is saying is that there will be opportunity to at least put several hundred megawatts of 4 and 8 hour batteries and put them into the distribution network to sort of help the network manage future expansion needs. And as a result, we can see a significant reduction in the network expansion panel in terms of the long-term distribution traditional investment needs, right? You can see there is more than a one-to-one trade-off in terms of batteries located in the distribution network versus the amount of network expansion that it offsets in the long term. And the reason is just because batteries are extremely flexible. Unlike network investment, you either put in this equipment or not. For battery, you can keep scaling them and you can keep building them up over the time as load grows. And as a result, this is expected to bring a lot of benefits to electricity consumers in the long term. The other very interesting result we have found, and I should remind everyone that we are already assuming the step change level of rooftop PV uptake in the status quo. But what we have found is that even against that extraordinary level of long-term rooftop PV uptake, the distribution techno-economic model still finds there are pockets of the distribution network where there is benefit to install additional mid-scale rooftop PV. So those C&I scale rooftop PV on top of warehouses. And the reason that such opportunity arises in the late 2030s is because EV, as they start to charge in the middle of the day, are going to restore middle of the day load. And in some areas where EVs are expected to be concentrated, this will provide additional benefits and additional opportunities at the network level to actually put in more mid-scale PV. Probably the next slide. Thank you. So having seen the distribution techno-economic modeling, so what is happening at the distribution zone substation level, now let's look at the system level outcome. So what we've compared here is first in the status quo, this is how the New South Wales system looks in 2050. There's a bit of amount of renewables coming in. But yes, you can see they're mostly concentrated in the rural areas because that's where a lot of the wind and solar resources are available. And also at the same time, New South Wales is also relying on the interconnectors to support its demand growth. So what happens if we open up the sub-transmission hosting capacity at the distribution level? Well, so if we look at the panels on the right, so unlocking available capacity, what we can see is that overall, if you add up numbers, there will be a net increase in the renewable capacity that is connected into New South Wales. And that is because now there is additional hosting capacity made available in the distribution network. To be clear, if you read the report, you will find that all the transmission projects still goes ahead in the long term. Those reses such as New England are still needed. But what we are seeing is that there is now further opportunities to draw upon from the distribution network. And the other thing, other than the increase in the investment of renewable, that is interesting is the location of where those renewable are located. First of all, if you focus on the Sydney, Wollongong, and Newcastle area, you will notice that there is a significant increase in the solar uptake from 3.5 gigawatts to 7.4 gigawatts, and a bit more battery to go with the solar as well. And the reason is because now that we're fully utilizing the hosting capacity of Ausgrid and Endeavour's network, we are allowing more solar to connect right next to where the load is and pair them up with battery. And that is an efficient outcome because having solar so close to the load means that we're saving on transmission losses. We're also bypassing the transmission bottleneck, so the flow path constraints that goes into the Sydney load center. The other thing you will notice is in Essentials network, if you look at Central New South Wales as an example, right, the wind hosting capacity went from 5 gigawatts to more than 8 gigawatts, and there's also a little bit more wind in Northern New South as well. So by utilizing the hosting capacity in Essentials network, there might be opportunities to allow more wind to connect into the remote region. And so on the right-hand side, we have a much more efficient generation mix to meet the future demand. In summary, when there is a lot of load coming into New South Wales, especially by the data center, where Ausgrid and Endeavour's hosting capacity are ideal for co-locating solar and batteries to meet these demands. At the same time, we can use Endeavour's hosting capacity Essentials hosting capacity to make sure that those wind resources in the remote areas of New South Wales can be better utilized and go through the transmission lines to serve the overnight demand in New South Wales as well. So let's look at where the benefit comes from. So the next slide. So this is the change in the generation pattern. So the negative bars means what is generated less when we have all opportunities unlocked. So obviously, as we change the as we allow for more wind and solar to connect into the distribution network, they displace wind and solar everywhere else in the NEM. But the most important change, as you can see here, is the reduction in gas generation in the long term. And that becomes material after 2040. Because without exploring the distribution opportunities, we will have to run gas a lot harder to meet the overnight demand coming from all those flat loads coming from data center. And by having those wind solar batteries located at the right place in the distribution network, we're actually able to significantly reduce our reliance on gas. And as a result, there will be a significant emissions benefits, as most of you would know if we were to apply the emissions reduction value from the AER. I believe this is an overview of the modeling results. Back to you, Dan. Yeah, mute.
Yeah, thanks, Franklin, Mel, and Mark. So we'll start our first Q&A now on the modeling methodology, and thanks for all the questions that have been coming through. We've also received some questions through the registration process. So the first question I've got here, probably one for you, Franklin. Could you explain why battery capacity in central New South Wales and solar capacity in southern New South Wales goes down? I just on mute.
Yeah. I can. So that is the outcome of a system-wide optimization model. Rather than seeing battery or certain technologies capacity goes down in part of New South Wales, the better way of seeing it is that they got moved to the better locations. So we see more solar. We're generally seeing more solar moving towards the load center or central New South Wales, which is much closer to the load center. This is an outcome of utilizing the hosting capacity in the distribution network, which actually allows us to shift more of those renewables into where load is located.
Yeah, thanks, Franklin. Thanks, Ellie, for your question around coordination with Energy Co. We might answer that one in the second half of the session, because I think we'll be touching on that a little bit as part of the reform areas to unlock value. Got one here. You note in the report that the modelling outcomes are conservative. Can you please explain what you mean by this? Who'd like to take that one? Maybe does anyone else
I'm
want
happy to take that one. So indeed, we say it's conservative. So first, in terms of modeling, conservative in terms of how we look at demand and discount rates. But really what we mean by that is that we haven't explored the opportunity at the low voltage side of things, and that this analysis really stopped at the zone substation. And so while we think it's already a leap to do that and bring that into a roll-off system, once we have DNSP that are able to explore, understand that low voltage opportunity and make that visible, there would be additional benefits to that. And another important element as well is about those more intangible benefits. We think about social license, community benefits, and just like about the equity and fairness of the energy transition. And here the distribution network solution can help in that aspect as well. And that does not translate into numbers. So I think conservative quantitatively because we haven't factored in low voltage, and qualitatively because there is also all social license benefits.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I know the economic appraisal is conservative as well, with the appraisal period going out to 2050, but a lot of those benefits being back-ended. So if you continued it further, you'd actually get a larger net present value. We've just got another question here. So as DER and storage scale, is the absence of locational pricing making it harder to identify the best places for BESS on your network? If formal locational marginal pricing remains distant, what interim approaches might help approximate its investment signals? And I guess we also had some questions, I think, through the registration process around how distribution connected BESS can support the network more broadly. And are you planning to locate BESS near congested transformers? Would someone like to elaborate on how you see this working in practice?
Hi, everyone. There's a fair bit in that question, so we might have to answer some of that afterwards as well in the Q&A, but I'll have a first crack at that. So I think it's important to note the comment that Mark just made, which is that in this modeling, we just looked at the benefit of placing a battery next to a zone substation. So we looked at the synthetic population of zone substation, grew that out over time and said, could a battery help here, right? And what we found was that, yes, indeed, it could. And particularly where the upgrade of that zone substation would be difficult to do. So this is where there's limited space or the load growth is kind of slow enough that a battery would be a really good solution for that. So we haven't necessarily put forward in this report detail on how we would go about then doing that. But what we have identified is that doing that has real benefits. And then often you're talking about batteries that you would have otherwise put in higher level voltage levels or in the subtransmission or transmission network. And so, you're just shifting some of those batteries deeper into the network and you see value coming from that. And so I think that has two implications for us as we transition to DSOs. The first one is, I think it demonstrates that we have a really important role to play in system planning, in bringing some of these things forward and making that obvious in when we are thinking about strategically where do we put resources in the system, but also uncovering that value in a way that's accessible to the market as well. So certainly pricing is something that we've been pursuing for a while, and it was good obviously through projects like Project Edith. But I think, in addition to that, there's a number of projects going on in New South Wales around network support opportunities and flex together. There's like a few different bits and pieces. So it's really looking at all those options and making sure that value is there and makes sense, and that solution is practical.
Just to add to that as well, Alida, that's great. Alida has all of the much more technical nous, but just to add that it's not about the distribution networks doing, connecting all these batteries. It's about any third-party connected or distribution network connected battery. So it's about connecting batteries, regardless of who that who that stakeholder or who that developer or who that network service provider is. It's just there's value there, there's capacity there, and let's explore it for, as we said, for the system as a whole.
Yeah, thanks, Mel and Alita. Covered quite a bit of ground there. And yeah, the focus of this was really on what's the opportunity, not necessarily the ownership model. So yeah, good point, Mel. So we've got a question here. Do we know if these data and methods are similar to what AMO has been considering for the 2026 ISP and its integration of distribution network opportunities? Franklin, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, based on my read of the ISP methodology last time, I was a while ago, I think we were trying to capture similar things. Without seeing the ISP model, I believe the distribution techno-economic modeling goes one step at a lower level to capture the zone substation import and export constraints relative to what AEMO tries to do in the ISP.
Thanks, Franklin. That's a good summary. And we'll obviously continue to work with AEMO moving forward as this work progresses. Got a question here. So we had a number of questions in the pre-registration around data centers. Perhaps one of you are able to elaborate on how the DNSP data center forecasts, I guess, were developed. Obviously, Franklin spoke through sort of what they look like, but perhaps one of the DNSPs, the data came from the DNSP. So maybe hear from one of you about how those forecasts were built up.
Look, I can have a go at that, and Alita, Mark, please support. Look, Franklin did a great job of explaining the way that we have considered data centers in our assessment. We have taken data center applications, so all data center applications that have come in and the loads that they have provided to us out to 2030. So we haven't gone beyond 2030, so we're using what we have to 2030, and we've put a probability weighting on that. So we've said of the loads that they have said are coming into the network, we've taken a 30% estimate of that total load. So we think that's reasonably conservative in terms of the numbers going forward. And then what we have from 2025 out to 2030, we have just then extrapolated that in terms of the same growth profile out to 2050. Now, those data center loads are just for the cloud-based data centers. So those AI data centers that we're seeing now come through, they haven't been considered. Certainly not from Endeavour. I don't believe that was the case for Ausgrid either, but those loads haven't been considered, and those will come through, and expecting those to be even larger requests for the network. So when we say conservative, and I think Franklin used that term as well for the data center loads, it is a probability weighting, and it is just considering out to 2030 and just those cloud-based data center applications at this stage.
Thanks, Mel. We might have one more question before we move into the second half of the webinar. Just one last one around the size of BESS considered at the zone substation level. Perhaps, Franklin, do you want to speak to this one?
Yeah, we used a similar sort of approach as in AEMO's ISP. We've considered 1, 2, 4, and 8-hour storage. The model is able to pick any megawatts and out of those 4 storage durations. What we're seeing is basically the model invests in 4 and 8-hour storage at the distribution level. That sort of is very consistent with what we're seeing as the long-term storage duration needs in the market model, in the whole market as well. This is because just in the long term, the overnight price is going to become high price, going to become more extended. And in the long term, as demand continues to grow, the constraint on the distribution network is also going to become more extended. And as a result, it is much more efficient to build longer duration batteries than shallow duration batteries.
Thanks, Franklin. All right, we might might present again. We'll move into the second half of the webinar. So during the second half of the webinar, we're going to talk about the key insights and findings from the modelling, as well as some of the identified reform areas that can unlock the value that we've identified through the modelling. So I'll hand to Alida now to speak through the economic results.
Thanks, Dan. Yes, so I have the privilege of talking about what the outcomes of the modelling was today. So this is really looking at what the value to the system and to society from these utilising these opportunities. And as Franklin was saying, so opportunity one is really around better utilising available capacity within our sub-transmission network to connect utility scale resources, as well as in front of meter sort of storage. And you can see that has a range of 1.6 to 3.4. So the range is really because we looked over the three different scenarios. Generally speaking, the lower value comes from the falling short scenario where we have lower load growth, whereas the other two scenarios have very similar benefit values. Opportunity two is where we looked at, the resources that customers are putting in. If those were optimized, what value could they unlock as well? And that was a 0.7 to 2.2. When you combine those things together, because often we're talking about this, like obviously we're talking about the same market, but also talking about the same network zone substation constraints. They do offset each other a little bit, but actually a lot less than we thought, right? Surprisingly, you can actually put a lot of storage into the distribution network, put utility scale resources into the distribution network, and there's still a lot of value from coordinating CER. So that was an interesting finding. And one of the things, for instance, we found from the modelling that Franklin kind of touched on briefly was that you also get to a point where later in the later years, you need that additional storage to come in to help with electrification. So there's some really interesting insights on how the benefits play out over the two opportunities. You can see on the right-hand side, there's a bit of a breakdown as to what makes up those value opportunities or the benefit categories that we considered. So we looked at the deferral of distributions and substation upgrades. We looked at the deferral of those or the delay in the transmission, giving those that breathing space, as well as reductions in generation cost and reduced emissions. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of what we found. I think Mark touched on this in one of his answers earlier. We do think this is conservative. We think in particular the distribution network efficiencies could be higher when we do proper modelling below the zone substation and spend a lot more time doing kind of regional and area plans and collaborating with stakeholders on those and what is possible. But we were hoping that this at least gives a bit of a sense of, that there's definitely value on the table here. But it's not just about the economic value. There's additional things that we think comes from a more considerate approach and thinking about all opportunities when you do system planning, including things like just when you have more options, you're reducing your delivery risk, as an example. So because you've got more things that you can pull on. So on the next slide, we have a bit of a summary of some of our broader benefits categories as well that we saw through this project. And so in a second, I'm going to ask Mal and Mark as well for their reflections. We've been working on this project for, as Mel said, almost 18 months now, and we've all learned a lot from doing it. And there's been some things that have been really surprising, but then some things that we were kind of expecting. So we thought we'd share a little bit of our insights. For me, one thing that really stood out was just how much value came from the capacity in the subtransmission network, right? And subtransmission network is very similar to transmission networks in the way that we think about them. And so even if the only thing we did from this project was made sure that subtransmission was more broadly considered within system planning, there's already billions of dollars of benefits that would come from that. So that really stood out for me from the project. Mal, Mark?
Oh, there's a lot that that has come from this, as a leader sort of alluded to. I would probably say, just given the unknowns of the transition, given the unknowns regarding the loads, given the unknowns in terms of how customers will behave and the assets and the way that they will use energy, what I think has probably surfaced is that this gives you flexibility. It does buy you that time. So it gives you the flexibility with, okay, we're building out, for example, these reses, and and we will. I know there's a question on Energy Co and how we'd work with Energy Co, but we have commitments to renewable energy zones. The ones, for example, that aren't committed yet is the stage 2 CWO and the New England res, for example. It just gives you that flexibility to play around with, okay, what can we do to help as we're trying to figure this out, as we're trying to work out how much EV uptake there is, as we're trying to figure out what these data centers will actually draw from the grid. It just gives you that flexibility. And so that, for me, was probably, a big standout for this project.
Thank you, Mel. From my perspective, what's been very striking is comparing the network. They are quite different in some way. And the summary I like is saying that Osgrid and Endeavour are bringing the problem, and that Essential Energy is bringing the solution. Because in some way, to summarize, Melissa, you talk about, those unknowns, and there is a lot of additional demand that just a couple of years ago we didn't quite see coming in terms of data center, electrification, EVs. So that is coming. We have to plan for that. And at the same time, I think the key point from Alida regarding just that sub-transmission available capacity is absolutely critical, and that we can de-risk the energy transition, de-risk the building of transmission, and all contribute and do our part to that energy transition is quite interesting.
Yeah, I think also, we could have each done this ourselves and just gone off and did it. And I think what we would have ended up with was 3 plans that had very different recommendations or focus areas, because as Franklin showed, when you look at our networks, they're different, right? There's different, just how our customers are evolving and how our communities are evolving is different. And so I think a real strength of this was to come together and say, like, okay, they are different, but what are the key things here that we need to unlock value across all those differences? And that's really what we tried putting forward in the report. So I'll hand over to Mark for the next slide. We'll talk a bit about what our 3 kind of recommendations are from this work.
Excellent. Thank you, Alida. So we looked at the economic opportunities. We looked at the modeling methodology. Now it's time to focus about what can we do now to unlock the missing middle, to unlock those opportunities. What are the barriers that prevent that value from being realized? And one of the key highlights and almost surprise was that those 3 networks that are quite different are really seeing the same issues. And there's been a real consensus about what need to change in order to unlock these opportunities. So 3 networks ending facing the same problems. And here we've attempted to identify some key themes and areas of reform where we need to progress. But at the same time, we also propose some quite practical and concrete things that can change and unlock some of that value. There is quite a depth in the report, so I really encourage you to have a read, go through the report. There is more information in terms of the problems articulated and the tactical solution. Some of those recommendations are quite tactical, but by design, we want them to be quite actionable and practical as well. And also, before I go through them, I want also to acknowledge that there is no silver bullet. Those issues are quite difficult, and a number of parties will need to be involved and on board to make those change a reality. And we really hope those recommendations and this report can become a bit of a reference of what needs to change. All right, so first area of reform is about strategic planning. And here we say, give the NSP a seat at the table for strategic network planning and allow each New South Wales distribution businesses to create its own detailed plan and share it with the main planner for New South Wales to optimize that strategic integrated planning. And when you say sit at the table, I think it's a bit of a minimum. One of the key principles of this report was being bottom-up. And we really realized through that project the importance and the diversity of the context of the three networks. Each one are facing different constraints in different locations. Sometimes it's thermal constraint, voltage constraints, reverse flow constraint while there is uptick in CR, uptake. Off-grid network is tightly meshed. Essential energy network is the opposite, very linear. Sometimes the issue at a zone substation, sometimes it's about reconnecting upstream or downstream. So there is a breadth of local context that is very important. And I think a top-down view has some risk, almost a danger of misrepresenting the size and the value of the distribution opportunities. So really want to insist that the places and the local context matter. And there is a belief that the system engineers, part of each one of those networks, are best placed to understand and assess those opportunities and bring them to the system planner. Of course, doing that, it's more granular, it's more technical, it's more difficult, but we've just demonstrated with that report that that can be done. So the call to action here is to have a system plan that is informed by bottom-up, individual DNSP plan that then the New South Wales system planner can use to co-optimize across distribution and transmission. So that's the real call to action. Second area of reform is about project approval. So if we shift into an integrated strategic planning, we also need to complement that with reform to streamline the approval process for anticipatory distribution level investment, so that the distribution level can really support renewable generation, renewable connection, and there is that energy transition. And here we see a number of challenges at the moment. We know that distribution solutions are rarely identified through transmission and system planning. And one of the reasons for that is we think the modeling capability to really understand the distribution network goes beyond the traditional market modeling, and that's probably why it's not yet the case. Also would like to emphasize the current lack of flexibility of that 5-year regulatory period. We talked a lot about data center. Just like 2 or 3 years ago, this was not on our radar. And it's a big shift in terms of assumption and demand. So we need to be able to efficiently respond to those uncertainties. And the current framework doesn't really support anticipatory investments. It's more supporting the short-term needs where distribution network play a role about security, reliability, but not playing that strategic role. So here, some of the key points is about making sure the approval process match the overall plan for the state's electricity system. And here, the call to action is really to align that approval pathway to that New South Wales integrated system plan so that distribution opportunities can become considered more as a strategic solution to connect more renewable and a bit less as that tactical near-term solution for security of reliability issues. A second point is about creating a better way to review and approve distribution network projects that consider those unique challenges of local energy network. And really here, the call to action is about that assessment framework of distribution opportunity that needs to be updated, that it needs to be fit for purpose, for having an appraisal framework that is suited to really understand the specificities and almost the complexities of the distribution network under the EII Act. Last is make it easier to invest in projects that prepare for the future. And this is really about allowing the rules to allow more flexibility in the regulatory framework so that we improve the ability to invest in anticipatory projects. So overall, the summary here is, like the existing framework does not really support long-term distribution level anticipatory investment. And what we need is more flexibility, fit for purpose appraisal, and streamlined approval process. Next area of reform is about distribution storage. And I've seen in the chat a number of questions and a lot of interest in DBESS and the regulatory and market settings. Here, the modeling work is very clear, unambiguous. There is significant value in having distribution storage and DBESS. It helps reduce the system cost. It helps put downward pressure on electricity prices. And yet, we're not quite seeing those batteries proliferating at scale at the distribution level. So what's going on? On one hand, we say there is opportunity to connect in more, but on the other hand, it's not quite happening at scale. One of the key issues we've identified in the current regulatory and market factor settings is an unequal treatment of battery connected at transmission versus distribution. So if I take a very concrete example, you take a proponent, he's got a battery storage project, either it connects on transmission side or that very same project to the distribution side, they will incur different charges because DNSP are obligated to pass through the TUOS, that the transmission use of system charges, and also the roadmap charges, which apply only to distribution connected customers. So that pricing framework is misaligning the commercial value that best proponent would see in the market. So we really think that aligning and having aligning those investments and those tariffs would be important. In short, it's about a level playing field between the charges for DBESS between transmission and distribution. And the call to action is about the approach to calculate TUOS and network charges should be reviewed so that the overall system benefits be reflected for DBESS. We think that's quite a tactical and realistic thing that can be achieved, but of course, want to acknowledge there is so much more. DNSP are exploring new commercial model, and I'm thinking also about community batteries, which play a key role in that energy transition being fast and being fair. So there is more to be done and deeper regulatory reform that should be supported to enable those models to scale. So that's 3 key areas of reform: strategic planning, project approval, and DBESS. But there is also a bit more, and I'll hand over to Melissa to walk us through some more recommendations.
Thank you, Mark. I think Mark, pointed out that it's tactical and it's practical. Those, calls to action for 1, 2, and 3. They would probably be summarised as the tier 1s. I'll call these the tier 2s, which aren't probably as tactical and as practical, but they certainly need to be addressed in some way, shape, or form to help with bringing this value to life and to help support, the calls to action of 1, 2, and 3. So they don't sit in isolation, these 3. They actually do support the others, but a little bit more, to think about here, and a lot more collaboration that's needed to really, get these calls to action to service the value that we've identified. So the 3 that we have here, I'll start with the cost allocation. There's no doubt that the cost allocation is one that needs to be really rigorously, thought through and debated, because we certainly don't want to see an outcome where, regional or, all of Essential's customers are paying for, the activity that's going on in terms of renewable energy zones, so that the cost of the energy transition is borne equitably. And that customers who don't necessarily have those don't have those assets, or aren't even using the assets that might be on the networks, are fairly compensated, I guess, for that as well. So this whole cost allocation needs to be, as we've got there, carefully considered, so that it is a transition. We know that's going to be costly, but it is a transition that is fair and equitable. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And as we're seeing these big load customers come on as well, we've talked about data centres, and I'll talk about that next. We need to make sure that the customers that are using the assets, are definitely paying their fair share of those investments that are required to support them. So cost allocation probably sits behind that strategic planning aspect and the process approvals that Mark talked to. I'll go to data centres now, because I'll leave the CER and community assets to last. With the data centres, this one as well, I mean, we've seen those loads. It is definitely the talk over the last 3 years, and increasingly so, because it definitely will put a big burden on the system if we see the megawatts, or the braggawatts, some people call them, that could come through on the networks. And we need to make sure that it's not at the expense of connecting, households. It's not at the expense of connecting, those strategically important, precincts that are part of all of our networks, all 3 networks. So it needs careful consideration. And I guess the call out here is, how do we ensure that there's anticipatory investment to get the best whole of system outcome? So how do we, we certainly don't want to be investing and there's no use for those assets, but how do we plan ahead so that we can encourage the right location of data centre activity to the network that provides the best outcome for the system in terms of its reliability and security, but also in terms of ensuring that we get the connection for all of our customers in the right order. So that's a big consideration, a big discussion, but a discussion that needs to happen and probably has been put to the side, as part of this transition. But there's definitely the digital transition is definitely, just needs to be considered in that whole of system planning, and just certainly don't want an outcome where there are these, we've got here the stranded asset risk as well. So wanting to ensure that it's equally considered in terms of the planning, that whole of system planning process. The last one I'll come to, and probably the one that has a lot in there, and a lot that is still unknown. And we're not at all suggesting that that this DSP has all of the answers. It is a first. It considers, as Alida and Mark have already alluded to, it's at that zone substation level. There's a lot more to do at that low voltage level for us to consider. And it's really, there's a lot of work that's going on and a lot of models that are trying to determine how customers, or how those consumer energy resources are actually impacting the network, and how the network can help support that. And that's a coordination with retailers. That's a coordination with our customers. That's a coordination, with AEMO. So there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen in this space. So we recognise that CER is an important part of this piece of work, and that we've seen that there's, as we said, there's $2.2 billion of benefit that sits in the system. And so I think that 3 networks are certainly doing a lot in this area, but we're doing a lot very differently. And how can we streamline that? How can we optimize that? How can we put in the software and the hardware so that we can speed up the integration and see the value from that coordination? So we know that's an area that needs further exploration. We know we're all doing our bit with, with the community batteries. We're doing our bit with, understanding EV charging infrastructure. We're doing our bit with, bringing in, integrate or getting the solar, into the system and not disadvantaging customers who are investing in those systems. So there's a lot there that we need to consider. The big one probably is around that behavioural demand modelling, and we have touched on this in this piece of work. but we've only touched on it, and that's probably an area that we need to continue to explore. Where there was an energy behavioural demand model that formed part of the EVCI work that forms part of this piece, and something that we will explore further now with Dan. But collectively, I guess these 3 calls to action are not as I said, not as thorough or tactical as the first 3, but they are certainly calls to action that must be addressed for us to see the value of this distribution system plan. So with that, Dan, I'll hand over to you, and you can talk more about the behavioural side of the modelling.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. Yeah, as Mel mentioned, one area that does require further work is around understanding customer behaviour and customer response to different incentives and initiatives, particularly in the new energy system with two-way energy flows. The DSP, as Mel mentioned, took the first step towards this through development of the energy behavioural demand model. So this is a strategic agent-based model that uses behavioural economics to simulate customer behaviour. So it includes financial and non-financial parameters and looks at things like how price and other incentives, dynamic operating envelopes, subsidies can impact things like uptake of residential batteries, participation in VPPs, EV uptake, V2G uptake, and then the flow-on impacts that has for potentially like flattening load profiles and delivering system benefits that way, in addition to like supply-side solutions to network constraints. So on this project, we used it to look at the extent to which accelerated electric vehicle charging infrastructure rollout could speed up EV uptake and fast track New South Wales's transport decarbonisation. So the analysis looked at total cost of ownership, so purchase costs, fuel costs. We had like an inconvenience cost if you don't have off-street parking, and then we either removed or reduced that cost, if curbside charging was installed in close proximity to your home. The analysis found that accelerated rollout of EVCI could increase EV uptake by around 500,000 by the late 2040s before you reach sort of like a saturation point, and everyone's sort of got EVs anyway, so that's why it starts to come back together in sort of 2050. I guess, yeah, this is just one example of how the importance of understanding customer behaviour, understanding how demand side, often lower cost demand side interventions can address, network constraints alongside supply side, often more costly build outs of the network. So it's almost like you want to squeeze the lemon as much as you can on the demand side, and then you build out the network. And that all needs to come together, including interaction with, with customers all the way up to the transmission level, to optimize the overall integrated strategic network planning. So yeah, that's an area that definitely requires further work. But there are a range of other areas that we've encountered on this project that also require further work, and I might hand to Alida now just to talk through some of those.
Thanks, Dan. So I hope what people got from that section in particular, what Mel and Dan just went through there, is that this is very much the start of the conversation. We don't have all the answers, but we wanted to make a contribution to the ongoing national and even international discussions around how do we plan for distribution level opportunities now that we take that into account. So we've created a microsite, which if you're on this call, hopefully you also know how to access the microsite, where we've published the report, but we've made sure we've included our detailed technical appendices, so you can see the methodology we've used, as well as making all the graph data available. From here, we are keen to work with government and market bodies and retailers and customers, and really our local governments and so forth to look at, well, where do we go from here? What is the logical next way that we can make a step change in our maturity and how we consider this? I think to date, as networks, we've understood the importance of that local engagement, and we all have fairly large engagement programs with consumer reps and local government. But how do we do that in a way that contributes to the whole of system and really thinks about the system planning elements as well, and that can have that impact on the end-to-end system. So so we hope you find this report really helpful for that reason, that it is a contribution and that it is a first step. I know one of the questions that we got in the chat was around Energy Co and how we're working with them. So we did have a industry roundtable as well, where we had key people from across New South Wales and Australia that are involved in system planning attend that, as well as Energy Consumers Australia and the ENA and Energy Co, Transgrid, AEMO, sort of the usual crowd, to talk a bit about this report and what we think it could do. And I was really encouraged by the positive reception that it got. And I think particularly for the first time as distribution businesses, we just made a concerted effort to actually talk in system language, right? And not just to talk about how do we make sure our network's okay, but really how do we make sure we leverage our network and capabilities for the system. And so that's been pretty well received, so we're pretty excited about that. But inevitably, I think, we're going to look back at this first report and go like, wow, there's a lot that we left on the table. And so we're keen to continue to evolve and improve that over time. As Dan was saying, we will be publishing the Q&A afterwards as well. So we'll try and address as many questions as we can shortly, but then we will make sure that's on the microsite as well. And you can always contact us as well from the microsite if you have any other additional questions. With that, I'll hand over to you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Alida. So we've got some time now for a second round of Q&A, so I might stop presenting. So first question I've got here, what ways are you engaging with communities on this plan? What is the forward-looking engagement process? Sure, who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I think I briefly touched on it then, and I think we know firsthand the importance of bringing our stakeholders and communities along with us on this journey, and ideally do it in a co-design process as well. We as individual businesses have been actively listening to our customer needs, and it's actually part of what inspired us to do this piece of work. We often get the challenge that as networks we should work together more often, and that we should be more strategic in our planning, and that we should make sure that these opportunities are considered collectively, rather than hearing different perspectives from different networks, which makes it really hard to really understand what are the big things that's going to shift the dials. So again, even though that is really what inspired this, this is just the first step for us in putting something together that gives us that quantifies some of these things and these insights, and gives us another thing that we can engage with in a consistent manner with our customers and our communities.
Fantastic, thanks, Alida. Next question here from Ian Griffiths. How can the incentive structures of the TNSP and DNSPs be aligned to achieve the best overall investment outcomes and to realise the maximum benefits for all end customers? At present, they're each incentivised to build their own portions of the system, and there's no self-interest in them not adding to their own network or preferentially investing in other network levels.
Big question.
Big question.
So
yeah.
At a very, very tactical level, we highlighted, those discrepancies in terms of tariff between for distribution base. So that's one very concrete, very small ways to address that. But I think there is also a role for a New South Wales central planner, and maybe that's going to be part of the extended role that Energy Co is playing. But there is someone that assesses fairly the opportunity from transmission to distribution and non-network option as well, and evaluate that. I think this is probably why having an independent person in the room is important. While I really genuinely think front and center of this piece of work is, the wall of system benefits and the community benefits and the customer benefits. The wall of system planning would have to be led by probably an independent body.
If I can just add a comment to that as well, I think, Ian, you're asking exactly the right question. I don't think we have all the answers, but you are asking the right question. And I think we're regulated entities, and so we do have a constructed incentive environment that we're in, and so there's a lot of opportunity there to look at that and reform that. And we really want our incentives to be aligned with our customers and with energy transition, right? That is makes life a lot easier for us as businesses as well. Yeah, absolutely open to what that will look like, and looking forward to the AMC's review of their regulatory framework as well.
Yeah, thanks, Alida and Mark. And yeah, it certainly does tie in with the recommendation around the need for an independent integrated system planner. We've got a few questions here around system strength requirements. It wasn't necessarily the focus of the report on the analysis, but it was a consideration. I don't know if does someone want to speak to what we considered there.
I think it's a great consideration, and that's why I feel strongly about that bottom-up view being the way to go. And here through that project and having our different engineering team working together, identifying the constraint, we see system strength is one of the constraints, and there are many others. And this is where this report is a first step, where we did have some consideration for quite detailed view of thermal constraint, voltage constraint, system strengths, reverse flow, but more works can be done. And I think we're going to progress on that understanding as distribution networks build visibility and capabilities to understand the low voltage and the overall value.
Yeah,
so
thanks,
baby
Mark.
steps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely an area where we also need to do some further work. So we've got some questions here around how we considered data centers in the modeling and how that capacity is being met in terms of solar and storage, like additional solar and storage being connected. Franklin, that might be maybe one.
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, so we assume the data center sort of connect to the sub-transmission level. First, to avoid sort of biasing a particular zone substation sort of outcome in the technical economic model. Then in the market modeling, we asked essentially the model to find out the optimal generation mix to meet the data center. Well, in reality, it will be met by a mixture of technologies. But what we're seeing is a lot of the data center are primarily located near Endeavour and Ausgrid's network. And as a result, you will need to pair some batteries and solar around the load to sort of meet, which is going to be very cost effective in meeting that load. But just solar and battery themselves are not going to be enough. And that is the reason why we are seeing additional wind investment, which are located in remote part of New South Wales. And that is sort of coming through the transmission network overnight to support the demand from the data center. So it's not just solar and battery, but it's actually a combination of technologies.
Yeah, thanks, Franklin. No, it was a really great result to see how we can get more out of those transmission level reses by having more of that solar and storage located in closer to the load, where there's opportunities to do so. Got a question here from Lawrence Earlham. So AEMO's 2024 ISP assumed fairly material uptake of CER, EVs, orchestration, etc. Is the magnitude of results here, capacity energy, similar to AEMO's existing projections?
Yeah, so first of all, we assumed in the status quo the same level of uptake from the ISP step change. Although I think this is probably more, given the cadence of our modeling, it's probably more similar to the 2024 than the 2026 ISP. Also, the level of coordination is exogenous, which we turn them on and up and down based on the opportunities we modeled. So in the status quo, the level of coordination of this massive CER fleet is relatively low, somewhere comparable to the progressive change level of coordination. In the CER opportunity and unlocking opportunities, we then ramp them up to somewhere comparable to the step change level of coordination. So same level of uptake, but just different exogenous level of orchestration.
Yeah, thanks, Franklin. And yeah, that orchestration and the flattening of the load profile definitely delivers some material benefits. So,
Dan, if I can just add to that,
absolutely.
I think, and Franklin, I reflect on your reflection on this as well, is that, you know, we do see that significant increase in solar generation in the step change already, and you can remind me what that is in New South Wales. But even despite that, we're still seeing in the 40s, you know, a system that's hungry for energy and requires more CNI rooftop solar than that, which is pretty astounding.
Yep.
Thanks, Alida. So we've got a question here from Ariane Zahed-Manesh. Is the modelling based on least cost optimization? If yes, how are factors such as social acceptance and impacts considered? So I guess how are social license impacts considered?
That's not explicitly considered as part of the least cost optimization. It was somewhat reflected in the assumed delay in wind and transmission in the early years.
To add to that, there was consideration when we provided the hosting capacity for our networks in terms of what was considered a viable, location. So it wasn't just we're going to plonk these solar and wind farms everywhere. So there was consideration for what would be, an acceptable, or what would be probably more allowable. Have we considered all of those social license issues? No. I mean, there's a lot of wind that's coming in. There's environmental factors that would need to be considered. So we haven't got to that level of detail in this. However, there is, as Franklin has said, that is considered in terms of the delay. It is considered in terms of the locations we've considered, because each of the networks have a fair idea of where they can host these kind of utility scale generation assets.
Thanks, Mel. Well, I guess at a high level, though, a lot of these, particularly around Sydney, a lot of these sort of distribution res opportunities are locating that generation and storage, in industrial precincts or on existing rooftops. So there is, I guess, some, low social barrier sort of opportunities within that as well, which is good. So we've got a question here. What distribution options were considered as part of the $3.2 billion spend? There is a case study in the report on Dubbo, which I assume is one of them. Are you able to comment on others?
Do we each just want to say which ones we bought? So in the Ausgrid network, it's the Hunter Central Coast renewable energy zone, both the stage 1 and the future stages.
Endeavour, it's the Illawarra Res that's considered here.
And yes, the Dubbo project was considered, and some more based on previous assessment of available capacity within Essential Energy.
There were other considerations for other sort of D-reses, but modelled on like an Illawarra res, and where that could be scaled across other parts of the network. But yeah, very conservative estimates on the other ones. Illawarra res was the main consideration.
Thanks, guys. So next question, could you please explain how you have developed the interstate import-export numbers in the unlocking available capacity number that show large exports to Victoria and substantially lower imports from Queensland and South Australia? Is that because of the relative costs of wind/solar in New South Wales, Vic, SA versus other states? Given these other states have their own renewable energy targets, that may not mean the most efficient generation is built. Why do you think other states will be happy with this significant change in their level of renewable generation because of all this investment in New South Wales? Sorry, a bit of a long one there, but good question.
Yeah, I think at a high level, we used the interconnector transfer capacity as well as, according to the ISP, future expansion of VNI and QNI. So by 2050, we're sort of talking about this import and export based on the expanded interconnection with all three states. So, I mean, for this modeling, but because of the scope of this modeling, we only looked at utilizing distribution hosting capacity within New South Wales without looking at unlocking similar capacity in other states. And so as a result, we see obviously a lot more sort of renewable being planted within New South Wales to not just meet New South Wales demand, but also at the right time being exported to the rest of the state as well. That's what's driving the results.
I mean, in a wonderful outcome of this, wouldn't it be great if we could do this across the NEM and that other networks from the other states as well see the value of what can be delivered from, as Mark has said many times, the missing middle. So if this is a platform, even we've spoken a lot about the New South Wales and the opportunity to speak to get in that whole of system planning. But what a fantastic outcome if we can do the whole of system planning across the NEM and probably address that issue and the value that could be sitting across the other states.
Yeah, no, great point, Mel. Yeah, this is I guess a replicable framework that can be rolled out across other jurisdictions, and these opportunities, to different magnitudes and different degrees, but will exist in other states as well. So I've got a question here. Is there also alignment between the DNSPs on how the current market structures and settings might be changed to support efficient investments at the distribution level, including behind the meter CER versus front of the meter DER, beyond just TUOS changes? If so, is there anything we can share without preempting the outcomes of the DSMO roles and responsibilities workstream?
Look, I'll have a go. We, as distribution businesses, we are not experts in market design, I would say. So we are rapidly upskilling ourselves, and certainly these sort of projects where we get exposed to this modeling, we spend time with engineers and Frankenstein spend together and we talk through things. We learn a lot, and this project has really made me appreciate that there's a lot that we don't understand yet. And I think it's really almost impossible for anyone in our complex industry to understand all angles from all sides. So I say that just to say what we do understand is distribution, right? And what we wanted to make sure we did with this was put something on the table that's tangible, that makes sense to us, that others can pick up, that is in system language. But we don't necessarily know how the market needs to necessarily evolve to take those things into consideration, and don't necessarily have opinions on that. But as we step into this more distribution system operator role, that is a muscle that we will have to build up over time, and really start thinking about how do we use our network as a platform.
Yeah, that's right, Alida, and that's a big question. There's a lot to that. The other thing I'll add is that our customers are actually pushing in this direction, and I'm not going to say whether, I mean, it's an important, the conversations that are happening, especially, I mean, we're seeing it we've got a lot of greenfield development. A lot of new customers are connecting, and they're connecting differently, and their needs are very different. And that has to be considered. And what we do have is that connection to the customer. We have that information, and then how do we flow that through to make those, those decisions that are better for the system? And so certainly, as a leader said, gosh, we have, there's a lot that has been uncovered that's been more questions than answers. But we do have that insight. We have that depth. We understand that our customers are actually pushing, in terms of they need us to do more. And if we can bring that to the table, and if we can bring that insight, hopefully we can get some better outcomes.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Mel and Alida. So I've got a question here around the economic growth impacts of like investment in res renewables in specific locations such as Illawarra res. So we haven't undertaken like CGE economic modelling on this project, but that is something that there will obviously be economic benefits to those regions, and that is something that can be looked at further as part of the next phase of work. I've got a question here around curbside charges. So how committed are the DNSPs in curbside charger investment, and what is the DNSPs thinking the possible unfair competition that will result from their investments in curbside charges?
I might take that one because I think Essential Energy can offer an interesting perspective. First, the question is loaded. It's, DNSP bringing unfair competition by the investment. And when you think about Essential Energy, it's a remote and rural network. Well, there's no unfair competition because there's no competition. And there's no competition because there is not much investment happening. And the only way to deploy curbside charger is through grants and government interventions to giving the extra money to make it like somehow economically viable. So on one hand, it's not happening, but also we must realize the value of those curbside charging. If we think about fairness and equity of the energy transition, we know that once a customer can opt in and have an EV, its wall of energy wallet is significantly decreased. And also electric, those charging are very important for easing range anxiety and all that transit. So I think when the market is working well, that's very fine, but we must also realize that there is, I like the concept of last resort. When it's not happening, and if the networks are not doing it, who will? So I think it could be part of the solution in some assets like curbsides or batteries, where a network can play a role in some specific instances that help combine with normal market dynamic.
If I can also just add some commentary on this. So we did include in this report the EBDM, or behavioral demand work that Dan touched on. We didn't count any of that in our benefits. Like, we didn't say, and so therefore the EV take up is different, and that's what drives the economic value, right? So it's actually not part of our economic assessment. The reason we put those in the report is because we kept, as we were doing this work, going, man, we're not considering customers enough in this, right? And this was a little bit of a taster of the kinds of things that we think would be really important in this sort of work going forwards, which is to say, how do we consider things like customers that don't have access to off-street parking? What impact would something like that and like community assets have on their ability to participate in the energy transition as well? So we didn't put it in and say this is all the value is based on that. We just said, like, this is the type of analysis that the system really desperately needs in order to fully take into account customer behavior choices and equity considerations at the community level. And that's really an area that we think we need to be exploring, as Australia need to be exploring and further, and we all have a role within that. And that's like the recommendation 5 as well, touches a little bit on that, to say, you know, it's not just enough to do the system modeling on a purely what's the least cost impact, you know, economically optimized solution. There's a lot more to be done around how our customers make decisions, how our communities make decisions, how our communities develop as well. So we really just chucked that into the report to acknowledge that we can do more and we should do more in this space. And we know, you know, we had real reservations actually initially in even doing this piece of work without doing that more justice, but we just didn't have this first round, we didn't have multiple years to do the project. We wanted to at least put a spotlight on the fact that we have subtransmission, that there is capacity, that we can help right now, and remove some of that pressure off of bills. But hey, there's so much more we need to do in this space.
Yeah, thanks, Alita and Mel. So the next question probably wasn't quite the focus of this work, but is an important question, so I'll throw it out there. I hope you're going to answer the question raising registration how you make this actually work for proponents/developers by improving the commerciality, speed, and cost of the connection process. Also, the broken tariff frameworks. Without that, the rest is
That's a good call out. That's a good question. And, you know, I think another thing that we spoke about early on is it's not just about the network saying we need this and we need that, or the system needs this, but it's also how do we lean into this and how do we change our, you know, our connection application processes to, you know, help with the speed of bringing those, you know, those assets online. So it would, and obviously those calls to action then are about, as a system, how do we do this better? So, you know, the call to action number 2 was very much about the, you know, approvals process. It's very much about how do we do this more quickly? How do we cut back on that red tape, and how do we, you know, how do we make sure that we can just get those connections in quicker? And there's, not saying that we've got all the answers here, but it was definitely front of mind, and it definitely is in our calls to action. So there's a lot that we need to do as networks, and something, you know, that this, you know, working together, hopefully, you know, and I don't see, you know, igniting a lot more opportunity for us to get some of our internal processes and systems in place. And there's a lot that the networks need to do to kind of step into that, and we need to do our own heavy lifting there.
But also a bit of humility that we can't solve everything. Some of those solutions involve a number of parties, the regulator, services, and so forth. So it's going to be a collection of organizations that work together to really solve and make an impact. So hopefully we're really conscious of that and going in the right direction.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
But it's a fair call out. I think it's a fair call out, and needs to, yeah, be part of the conversation and part of the solution. Agree.
Yeah, absolutely. So I might throw out one more question, and then we'll have maybe a closing remarks. So have assumptions around hosting capacity been validated against constructability and deliverability, including giving consideration to land availability?
I'll take that one. And so the short answer is somehow yes. And Endgame's economics looked at land availability when we do some considerations such as, you know, wind and solar capacity. So that's part of it. Another important point is we focus mostly on using existing infrastructure. So that's obviously something that is, you know, deliverable and feasible to be leveraged. But also want to acknowledge that it's more of a strategic document. It's not yet your kind of ready to go delivery plan, and you know, delivering those projects will require some more research in terms of the next steps to deliver them. So more is needed, of course, but here we provide that overlay and strategic version.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I don't think we've got through all the questions, but we will post a Q&A on the microsite afterwards that I guess documents the responses that we've given today, as well as answers some of the other questions that we haven't had the chance to get through. But I might just close, I guess, each of you, any closing remarks and what you see as the critical next steps required to realize the value that's identified through the report. I'm happy for whoever wants to go first.
I can go first. I was quite encouraged by the CR task force consultation on the future role of distribution businesses, that as a DSO or a distribution system operator, the roles and responsibilities they're considering, that they included a call out on system planning, that actually distribution businesses have a role to play in system planning. I've been the head of DSO at Ausgrid for almost 6 years now, and that actually until really this piece of work wasn't something that was really part of our framework or part of our thinking. And so it's been great to see that mature and that become part of the debate, because I do think distribution businesses, we have a lot of smart engineers that understand the networks and the communities that they're in very well. And would it be great if we can really, take advantage of that, bring that into a consistent framework and actually make that part of our system planning. So I'm pretty excited about that. I think it's part of networks growing up and being key contributors to the energy transition. And it really is about saying, not just being like we need more attention or we haven't been considered deeply enough, but to say, here is our contribution. This is how we can take what we know and make it actionable.
We're going in alphabetical order. I'll go next then. Look, Alida, yes to all of that. I guess I'll add to that. It's actually, other than we're very excited about this piece of work. Is it perfect? No. Is there a lot more to do? Yes. Are there probably more questions that are raised? Absolutely. But to see 3 networks come together with a shared goal and a shared vision, and knowing that there is value there, and to work together. And, I said that early on, that the depth that we went to into our businesses in terms of the workshopping that we did across the data teams, the regulatory teams, the planning teams, the connections teams, to really understand, well, what is happening on our networks and how can we bring forward the best information we can for this, for this inaugural DSP, and to see the commitment from the business, that knowing that there is value there is capacity there, and there is more that we can do. For me, that was just like, a great effort and a great experience to see that, what maybe traditionally has been networks working very individually, but to see across the board this working together was quite outstanding. And when we had the round table, the industry launch, as Alida said, it was received really well, and it was we always knew there was value there. Everybody talks about the value, that sits in the middle, but you actually quantified it. So what can we do? Like, what can we do to make this happen? So I think if it's ignited, it started that ripple effect. That's fantastic, and that's what we want. We can't just sit back though, and we need to keep sort of moving forward and getting the questions, getting the scrutiny, getting the challenge that's needed to make this work. So, I guess there's excitement, be that, we bring on all the good and bad questions that will come forward, but it's only going to move us forward in the right direction. So, yeah, it's been a wonderful piece of work.
And what I'm really thrilled about is the level of interest for this piece of work. And we see, thank you everyone for joining this webinar and being curious and being interested in those opportunities that the distribution level can bring. At the top level, it's very ambitious. We want to a bit of change the industry narrative and the perspective about the distribution network and what it can bring. And you're all part of this industry. So sharing that understanding, sharing that voice, and amplifying it will be very, very valuable. So thanks everyone for joining.
Fantastic. Thanks all. Franklin, any closing remarks from you?
No, I mean thanks. I mean it's been a great opportunity for us to work together with DNSPs and with KPMG. I mean we've actually learned a lot ourselves doing this project. And look, I mean the only thing I could say is had I known everything we went through 12 months ago, would I sign up again? The answer is yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I guess for me, like I've worked on a lot of big infrastructure projects. They often come with a big cost. I guess the special thing about this project is how it's about, you know, getting more out of what we've already paid for, you know, in the best interest of customers. So, and obviously working with a great team, Franklin, Alida, Mel, Mark, and a lot of other people behind the scenes as well that don't have their faces on the screen right now. Yeah, so thanks everyone for taking time out of your busy Monday to hear more about this project. Please be in touch if you have further questions, either email through the microsite or reach out directly. Yeah, and we'll look to continue to progress this work forward. Thanks all.